Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast, Nothing for Nothing Leaves Nothing. I'm your host, Lewis, and our topic today is going to be work ethic. Let's talk about it. Welcome back to the podcast. So like I said, today's topic is going to be work ethic. It's going to be the subject of conversation today, and let's just look at it. What is work ethic? A work ethic is a personal set of values that determines how an employee approaches their work. Now, the reason we wanted to talk about this today is because society has changed in so many ways, and work ethic seems to be one of those things where society has taken a major change, in my humble opinion. Talked to some folks as well. Some people kind of have the same viewpoint. But when you look at work ethic, right, like that drive that makes you get up every day when you're tired, exhausted, you're burnt out because you've been working crazy hours, but you're still getting up every day going to your job, right? If you look at things from the past, like they say back in the day, right, you look at the way generations previous to ours worked, right? Once you had a job and the job was consistent, that pretty much became your mainstay job, right? It's how you paid your bills, it's how you supported your family, and that's what allowed you to live and survive. Now, obviously, if you got hired and you were working a job, and most people would consider, like, if you was working a job that was, in your opinion, a dead-end job, right? It's not going anywhere. You're not really making any stride. Yeah, I can see how that can affect one's work ethic. But if you look at the way things are today, right, and I would use the previous two places I worked as an example. One place I worked was work conditions. You were outside dealing with the elements. Most of the folks that came into the job, had a past, I will say, right, to be nice about it. Had a past, so they were usually using that job to kind of get themselves started and to progress. But it was a place where if you worked and put the time in, you had an opportunity to advance when opportunity came. Now, some people say they wanted to advance or say, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. My plan is to do X, Y, and Z. But then they never followed through on it. Barely came to work late. When they were showing up late, didn't have a good rhyme or reason, kind of making excuses why they weren't at work. So then, pretty much you got out of the job what you put into it, right? It goes back to when I talked about the name of my podcast, Nothing for Nothing Leaves Nothing, right? Those who do not give shall not receive. If you give nothing to something, then you get nothing back in return. And that's kind of how it works. But if you look at society now, right, especially when you look at the youth, right, and this is not categorizing all youth, but if you look at it, a good majority of them don't have a good work ethic, right? And the question I always have is, why is that? Why don't they have a good work ethic, right? Like when I came up, my father was like, look, you got to work. If you work, you make your money, you give your funds to the house. That's how you live, right? Now, what that was doing was, it wasn't like he was taking the money and then just going to do whatever with it. Like, he held on to it, so when I needed things, I was pretty much getting my own money back, in a sense. But what it was establishing was building that work ethic, right? Like, you have to work. You have to put things in to get something back. And if you look at things now, like you have people out there, man, that take a part-time job and will ride that job like it's a career job, right? And you think most part-time jobs, you're not making a whole lot of money, you're not working a whole lot of hours, but people look at that and they're like, yeah, man, like, this job is killing me, man, like, I really don't want to do it. And it's like, okay, like, what's your circumstance? What are you doing to better yourself, right? Came across, like, sat down with some folks, man, and one of the things that came up, like, when it was like, you have grown men, right? And I'll use men for an example. We won't mess with the ladies, but in the case of some ladies too, right? But you have folks that are in mid-30s, late 30s, working a part-time job, and that's their sole job, right? They don't have an apartment because they're living with somebody. They might be living with a group, living with a relative, or whatever the situation is, but they have no drive, right? You have no push to do better, no motivation, no value to get you over that hump and make you perform or seek better for yourself, right? And when you look at work ethic, man, and that work ethic ties into how you perform your job, right? If you don't really have a work ethic, you show up to work and it's like a punch in to punch out. You show up, you punch in, you do the bare minimum, then you take off and go home, right? And then you go places like I've seen places, we use restaurants for an example, right? You're going to a restaurant and you'll have a waiter that's like top tier, awesome, right? So you're like, man, that's good stuff, man. That person got a good work ethic, right? They're putting that time and they're working and they're trying to strive to do something. Then you got someone you come across and you're like, man, this person just doesn't give a F, right? They don't give a crap about the service they're providing, what they're doing, or nothing. And the crazy thing is, like, when you look at it now, that is not a thing for just like jobs that are part-time. You have folks that work full-time jobs, right? Work for a company where the company's paying you, $21 to $22 an hour. And for some, they might be like, okay, that's not a lot of money. But if it's a full-time job, you're getting 40 hours a week, getting paid every 2 weeks. It's pretty decent money, especially when you have benefits and things of that nature. But you have folks that have these jobs and then they still like don't put effort in, right? And a lot of times you have to think, man, when you're working and people looking at you and they're looking at your drive, your work ethic, that's how they evaluate you, right? So you might be trying to get up for a promotion and you're like, man, I'm not making enough money at the stage that I'm at. I need to make more money. How do I get there? You might show that you can do something one time, right? Consistency, right? Everything in life boils down to consistency, right? If you're working a job, be consistent in what you do, right? Be consistent in being on time. Be consistent in giving 100% effort. Be consistent in being that reliable person, right? A person might say, okay, hey man, I want to step up. I want to be the second person in command, right? Or the assistant to whatever. You might be assistant manager or whatever if you're working in the store where they have store managers and a breakdown like that. People like, okay, hey, my goal is to be the assistant manager, right? As a phase, not saying that you want to be the assistant and stay the assistant, but that's what you want to get to. A manager tells you, hey, man, show me, right? Show me that you can put that work in. Show me that you can be that second person, the person that I can rely on when I'm not here to run the show and keep things afloat. Okay, you do it once or twice, and then you're like, yeah, man, I did it. But you're not consistent with doing it, right? That's where your work ethic comes in, your drive, your push to be better. And it's one of those things, man, where you look at it, like, and you start looking at society as a whole, right? Like, the one thing that always trips me out is when you have folks that's like, man, I'm not making enough money, man. This job's just not doing it for me. Okay, that's cool. But are you showing up to work, right? You can't say a job is not paying you enough money. You working a part-time job. You schedule to work, I'll say 4 days out the week. You show up for 1 or 2, right? Now you mad at the job because they like, okay, man, you're not reliable. We're not giving you no hours. Now you're like, man, they messing with my money. They're not giving me what I need. Well, you're not giving them what they need, right? They're paying you to perform. They're paying you to do a task. If you can't complete or do the task, they're not going to pay you. And it just trips me out, right? Like, I would consider myself to have a great work ethic, right? I show up to work and I work, right? I barely take time off, right? Sometimes taking time off can be like pulling teeth, right? But at the same time, it's one of those things where I realize where it's like you can be giving max effort, but you still have to make sure that you take time for what's important when you have to, like you have a child, you have events and stuff coming up, not giving and taking everything in your life and dumping it into the job. And I guess that's a weird thing to say when we talk about work ethic and putting in effort. But what I mean by that is having work-life balance, right? Having a balance between the two. Having a balance to where you can show up, perform, and do outstanding at your job, but also not letting your job completely consume you, if that makes sense, right? That's one of the things that I look at. But it's just like the society thing, like I said, man, where you're watching and you're seeing people just not give two craps. Right. And I always question that. I'm like, well, why is that, man? Like, what is the situation? And a lot of it breaks down to, like, on anything in life, it comes down to what's your background? Like, what's your base? What's your foundation? Right. My family foundation is to work. We work, right? If you want to get anything, that's how we were raised. You wasn't given anything without you doing something, right? Case in point, you were in school. Guess what? Your sole focus in school was what? To go to school, learn, get your grades, right? So if you went to school and gave half-ass effort, when your report card came, you got checked for having a bad report card, but you didn't expect to get anything in return for that other than probably an ass whooping. But like Christmas time coming up, report cards come, right? And you like, oh man, I want X, Y, and Z from Santa. I want this and that. And then you got to jack the report card. Guess what? You ain't getting what you want, right? You might get one of the items so they don't make sure you don't feel bad, but you're not getting all that stuff because you didn't perform. You didn't give the effort, right? And it starts that young, right? Like If you don't do what you're supposed to do, you're not going to get it, right? Everything is a give and take, right? But you have to have at some point a self-motivation, right? Like people can say, okay, well, my parents didn't raise me that way. This is how I was raised, and this is how they go through life. Okay, I can see that to an extent, but at the same time, at some point, you have to look at yourself and make that decision and make that determination to be the one to push to do better for yourself. What always trips me out is when you see folks or people that have kids and then they have a part-time job, and then they're like, man, I'm not making enough money, I'm not doing this. And it's like, okay, I get that. I get it. Sometimes that part-time job might be the only job that you could have at that time to support your family, right? But the thing and the issue I have a lot of times is when people use that and they try to make a part-time job a career, as opposed to finding out and determining their niche to find a job that can be a career, right? If you have a career, that's a job that you're working consistently, long-term, you have your benefits, your pay is for the most part pretty decent, you would hope, right? And it allows you to be able to sustain yourself and to be able to take care of your children. Trips me out is when you see guys and it's like, yeah, man, I'm about to have my second kid, bro. And it's like, you working a part-time job, right? But it's not the point of you working a part-time job. It's the point of you having a part-time job and not working, right? You got a part-time job, you about to have a kid, and you show up to work 1 to 2 days out the week. How's that supposed to look? Or the fact that you're about to have a kid and you don't have a full place to stay, your work is not consistent, right? Like you have no structure to be able to take care of a child. And that's the thing that always like makes me take a step back when you look at folks and you hear these stories from just having conversations with people and talking to them, and it makes you sit there like, wow, man, like, why is that, right? How do you look at yourself in the mirror, especially if you're as a man, right? And as men, you know, from old time in history, how they look at a man's role is you are to be a provider, right? Like our job is to be a provider, to provide, to take care of the family, to make sure everything is in line, make sure bills and stuff is paid, and do that, right? And for some people, it either is not in them, they just don't have it, they've never been shown it, or some people would just, it's sad to say, just lazy. They just don't want to do it. It's like society has changed to the point where a lot of people are in this mindset where they want things handed to them as opposed to going out there and getting it, right? Term people use a lot of times is getting it out the mud, right? And getting it out the mud means like you grinding. You starting from, you might get to a job where you might work at a place where you start off as a janitor, for example, right? And then you go from a janitor to a next phase, and then from a next phase to a next phase, to the point where now you done been at a company for X, Y, and Z years, you got time in, and you have made it your career. Like you've set yourself up for having a career, right? The thing that people don't realize now is about actually getting the job and then actually putting time in, like vesting time, right? You're not going to get nothing out of a company if you bouncing from job to job to job to job because your work history is all over the place. People look at that and then look at this like, man, you're not consistent, right? You might be here for 2 months and then you leave, sit on your butt for a month, collect unemployment or whatever, and then you back to another job, right? So people are always trying to work and escape the system, right? That doesn't work. A lot of times, like for myself being a veteran, right, it's a lot of times it's usually easier for vets to get jobs, right, when we get out the military. Why? Because it shows in the military there's a structure, right? You know where you have to be, the time you have to be there, the tasks you have to do, and how it needs to be performed. So a lot of times when people see that, their mindset, now that's not the case for everybody in the military. You got in the military what we like to call shitbags, right, which folks that even while they're in the military, they doing the bare minimum to skate by. Most of those folks usually come in 4 years in, they out the door, right? But if you're in consistently for an extended period of time, you talking 1, 2, 3 enlistments, or you make the military a career, once you get out, you have something in your back pocket that shows people like, look, I'm consistent, I'm reliable, and I can do the job. When you give me a task, the task will get completed, right? And I'm going to show up and I'm going to work every day. Putting that work in, right? You hear stories like I was talking to a friend of mine the other day. Dude was working crazy hours, right? Exhausted, burnt out, alarm going off in the morning. He laying in the bed just like, man, I just don't want to do it, right? But guess what? He got work ethic. He got a family to take care of. He got things to do and things that he has to provide to make sure his family is good. And guess what he did? He got up, pushed through, went to work, right? You have another person, right, on the other flip side of that, that person's worrying about a girlfriend or worrying about something other than work, not doing the things that they need to do. And it's those things, man, where you look at it and it's like situations like that. A lot of times things that come up where it causes issues for folks when you're thinking about work ethic, right? In the sense of how many times have people, like, I know everybody listens to this podcast, right? When people listen to the podcast, how many times have you had a friend, you're working at a job, you get a friend's like, hey man, can you help me get a job? Like, I'm really struggling, blah, 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 blah. And it gives you cause for pause, right? Your first inclination, obviously, if it's a close friend or a person that you deal with all the time, you're like, all right, cool, man, yeah, let me try to help this person out. But then you got to take a pause. If you've been working at a place for an extended period of time, you've built up a reputation, you have a name in that place, depending on who the person is, you're probably not going to stick your neck out for them, right? In some cases, you might get a person a shot, something low level where they're not really attached to you. So you can be like, all right, look, man, you get in, you're on your own, bro, do your own thing. But then you have times where you go to help somebody out and then it's like you get, you kind of get stuck out there, right? And I've seen it with friends of mine. I've seen it with family members and stuff like that. Like, and family members is probably the worst situation for it to happen, right? I had one recently, right? I'm going to name names, but folks listening to know who it is if they know. Like I said last time, if you know, you know. If you don't, you don't. But a situation where a person's got a family member working at a job, doing good, making a name for themselves. Another family member's like, hey, kind of need help because can you get me in the door? Cool. Get you in the door. Once you're in the door, man, you're on your own. And literally, sometimes you have to set that standard. Once that person's in, they look, yeah, they might be a family member of mine, but look, what they do is what they do. What I do is what I do. Don't put the two together. So when you start slacking, don't go to work, don't do the stuff you need to do. Now people, in some cases, might be looking at the other family members like, yo, man, you told me to hire this person, man. This person ain't worth nothing, right? It happens. But that's where you have to know people's mindset, people's drive, people's work ethic, right? Like understanding the mindset, right? You can be working for a huge company, right? They starting you off, like I said, $20-something an hour. You got good benefits. You getting yourself rolling. You got kids. Your benefits and stuff is covering. Your kids are taken care of. And then people don't perform. And the thing that gets me about that is when people lack a work ethic, they lack accountability, right? Accountability is always key and big when you're working anywhere or for anything that you do, anything in life. You have to be able to be accountable for the things that you do. If you make a mistake or whatever comes up, you have to be able to be accountable, right? You have to be able to take your L's, as they say. Like if you screwed up, take your L, do better, but take your L and move on. Don't sit there, fight, bicker, kick and scream like you didn't do anything where they have facts. 9 times out of 10, if somebody's coming to correct you at work because of something that you did wrong, they usually have proof, right? It's like trying to go to a court case and all the evidence lines up like, hey, you did this. And the person's like, hey, man, it wasn't me. And it's like, nah, that's you. We got you on video. Like, you're busted. That's you, right? And things like that. Like, be accountable, right? Don't run from your issues. Face it, right? If you know you screwed up, take your L, man. People will have more respect for you and look at you in a higher regard when, even if you're at work and you have a mistake, you have a hiccup, and you take your L as man or as a woman, right? Hey, yeah, I screwed up. That was on me. I messed up. I'll take the correction. I'll look to do better the next time, right? A lot of times that's all you have to do. It's not always a critical thing when they're like, oh, you screwed up, we got to fire you, right? Unless you do something that within the rules they consider as a major violation or automatic no-go, and then they let you go. Even in those situations, if that happened, you can't get mad at the job, right? Because this is what you did. This is the choice you made. The choice you made resulted in what it resulted in, right? You ultimately losing the job. But I guess my biggest thing when it comes to work ethic and what I want to put a stamp on, with using this podcast is, man, you're not going to get anything if you don't put anything in, right? You got to get out there. You got to work, right? If like I said, your situation is what it is, whether you have kids, you don't have kids, whether you have a place to stay, you don't have a place to stay, or you're trying to get yourself together, trying to establish something. You have to start somewhere, right? And I think that's another thing that people have an issue with, which messes with their work ethic. People might hold themselves in a higher regard than they think they are. And there's nothing wrong with being confident. I'm not saying that at all. Be confident, stand tall, go into it with your head high, go in there with your morals and stuff intact and be ready to roll. But if you go into a situation where you're expecting something and then you don't get what you're expecting, don't let that be the end goal to be like, oh man, well, F this place. I'm not doing nothing. I'm going to do just what I need to do and I'm going to get out of here, right? Because when you do that, you end up in this cycle and this bad rotation of you just there to be there, right? That's you. Those are the reasons why that morning when you get up because you're tired, you might be like, man, screw it, I'm not going, right? And it's one of those things where it's a trip, right? It bugs people out, right? When people see yourself working hard, and you see the people around you working hard, and then you always have that one or two people that's they just don't care, right? They're not putting in any effort, not doing anything, but they're the main ones to complain, right? Heard recently, like at the place I work now, right? Had a guy, not this place, they hire part-time folks, they have full-time folks, right? Part-time dude working and getting ready to have a kid, right? Cool beans. He has several kids, right? So this ain't his first rodeo. Got it. Situation comes, he at work, folks around is like, yo, man, this is messed up, bro. Like, they won't let the dude leave. It's like, all right, what y'all want, like, y'all telling me for what? Okay, he can't leave. Why can't he leave? And I'm like, what happened? He was like, oh, man, he just had a kid, man. His girl's still in the hospital. She good? Like something wrong? Nah, she's fine. Everything's copacetic, but had a baby. She's in the hospital. She ain't get to go home yet. Okay, cool. Man, I'm stuck here at work. I get it, right? You might be there with your girl, but let's look at this. Let's look at the scenario as a whole, right? And your first inclination is like, oh yeah, man, he should be at the hospital with his girl. But let's look at the totality. You burnt up all your time before your child was born. So now you want the place that you work to cut you a break because you didn't take care of your responsibilities, right? They was like his girl was mad at him because he was at work and wasn't there with her. I get her being mad, but at the same time, she kind of got herself to blame, right? Because those days when he got up and he was with her and he was like, man, I'm just not going to go to work today, burning up time. That's part of the day where she should have told him to get his behind up and take his butt to work, right? So both of them made a decision and made a choice, and that choice affected what was going on later. Now, granted, the good thing was she was in good health. She wasn't hurting or nothing like that. But it's just a simple fact being sometimes you want somebody there for that moral support. He couldn't be there. Why? Because he had an obligation to work. And that obligation to work superseded him being there with her because he didn't have any time, right? Poor planning, in a sense, on both parts, right? But a lot of times this is what you see, right? Like that happens all the time. People take those days where they just like, man, I'm just not feeling it. Okay, cool. Take time off, personal time, whatever you take. Then you have no time left. Something comes up and now you want somebody to give you a special accommodation because you didn't make the decisions you needed to make at the time to be able to take care of yourself. That goes back to those values and those work ethics, right? Those values to be like, okay, yeah, it's a crappy day. I don't feel like going, but guess what, man? I got to get up and do what I need to do, right? So I say in closing, when it comes to work ethic, for all my folks out there, like I get it. Things can be hard. Things might not be the best situation at the time, but if you stay true to your values and you stay true to putting the work in, giving the place that you're working the time that you need, or if it's not your place, your end all be all place, give it enough time to set yourself up to be able to advance and to make a move to where you're not putting yourself in a bad predicament, right? Work ethic. Stay true to the cause. Always hold true. Push through, even when the days when you don't want to, and always give yourself an opportunity to be able to do better. Don't rely on other people to give you that, and that comes from you having your own work ethic. This is Lewis, signing off. Like, listen, and subscribe. Comment down below when you can. We're now on YouTube, so feel free to comment, and we will use those comments in our future podcast. So appreciate you guys for listening. You guys have a good night.